is Nadia Hohn, and I am an educator, an author, and also a graduate student. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce author, poet, and I believe lawyer as well, NourbeSe Philip. And NourbeSe Philip is the author of this wonderful book called Harriet's Daughter, published in 1988 by the Women's Press, I believe it's called. Um, so I just want to first take this opportunity to say it's such a pleasure to finally sit down and meet you and talk to you.
There's a new edition of Harriet's Daughter coming out
Oh, that's great.
from the company that in England, not here in Toronto.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, we can talk about that later.
Sure.
And no, just sending out best wishes to everybody who's
Okay.
watching your channel and your work, and just in these very, very difficult times.
Yeah.
That's been so hard on everyone, and yeah,
Yeah. And
you just yeah, just walking the walk with all of us. Yeah.
awesome. And just to give you an idea of your background, you were born in Tobago or Trinidad, or
Yeah, so I was born in, officially it's the Twin Island state of
yes.
Trinidad and Tobago, but
Okay.
those of us from Tobago who, my family on both sides
Hmm.
are from Tobago, we tend to be quite, how shall I put it? We feel quite strongly about the island, Tobago,
Hmm.
and so
Yeah.
I always like to say that I was actually born in Tobago, although
Hmm.
it's one state with Trinidad. And
Yeah.
Tobago has played a large role in my life as a writer.
Hmm.
And as you mentioned, Harriet's daughter, those who know the story know that one of the young girls who becomes friends with the
Hmm.
protagonist actually wants to go back to Tobago. So I think I
Okay.
was
Okay.
writing some of my stuff there. I
Yeah.
know I'm jumping
Okay.
ahead of your
Yeah. Yeah.
questions.
Because I'm
Okay,
gonna get to
yeah,
that. We'll get to that.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I was supposed to. I've been to Trinidad. My parents are from Jamaica. I was born in Canada. I was
yeah.
supposed to go to Tobago for a day, like with my friend. She's from Trinidad, so we were supposed to go for a day because I guess Tobago's kind of seen, I guess, sometimes as like the cottage,
Yeah,
like yeah.
that's a good way of
So
putting it.
yeah, so I was looking forward to that because I've just heard how beautiful it is, and yeah, I really and part of the book actually takes place there, but I'm not going to get too far ahead. But I do want to tell you about the book and how it's impacted my life and my work.
Hmm.
First of all, I grew up here, was born in Canada. I went to a Catholic school in Toronto. I was a bookish kid. I loved to read, and I was always looking for books that represented my people, my background. I wanted to read about kids from different places, and I loved learning about different cultures and all of that. And then what happened? I come to the library one day and I see this book and I'm like, what? See black people on the cover, and then I see the CN Tower, and I was like, wow. I took the book out, and it was the first time I ever saw any book with Caribbean protagonists, Caribbean girls, black girls like me growing up in Toronto, and I just like, wow, like it spoke volumes to me then. I knew how
Hmm.
special it was then because I had never seen anything like that. And I could relate to I could relate to the main character a lot. I remember those times outside in the first chapter. You say she's out in the playground and it's feel all you do is stand around and feel cold. That's exactly how I remember all of my elementary school years, just standing outside in the cold and just waiting for it to be over. Like I just couldn't get out, get away from it. And just even, you know, especially at that age, friendships are so important. So
Yeah.
you say the absolute, how do you say it?
Absolutely. Break.
Absolutely friends. So I remember how important it was, those kind of friendships. So I read the book. I don't know if I finished the book, and I don't think I understood everything. I was probably 11 at the time reading this, but just talking to some of my other black girlfriends who grew up in Canada, some of them were given this book at a young age. So it was kind of like our Judy Blume, "Are You There,
Oof.
God? It's Me, Margaret,"
Oh,
right?
wow, 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 wow,
Right.
wow,
So
wow, wow.
I read that book too, but this was the first time I saw anything that looked like me. And as so I'm now doing this reading course, English reading course. I actually want to look up Black girlhoods and how they're written about. So I reread this in January, and I saw so many things. Like I think maybe developmentally, I just wasn't able to understand at the age of 11 what was going on. I thought the girls were my age then, but I realized they're 14. And at that age, you're going through so much. So, um, what I was surprised about was the strong feminist or womanist themes in this book. Um, I didn't. There's a topic of domestic violence. I don't remember that part.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and other forms of abuse. I and I remember Margaret said something like about being uncool, no style, no class, and brains. That was me. That was me. So, so, but what I appreciated was, wow, like this book I felt like could be read in university courses and on Caribbean feminism, Caribbean women's feminism, and all of that. And so it's written. The language is sophisticated, and it's for me in terms of like all the middle grade and young adult books I read. The language is like, this is sophisticated language because it forces the reader to have to figure things out. So I'm going to get to that in the first chapter, but
Okay.
one of the things that I was wondering was, did you like, was that your plan overall? Was this really to introduce, like, this is like almost like a feminist primer for young girls? Like, I see that in a way. Did you see your book in that way, or how did you think it would be
Actually,
received?
no. I mean, you know, what is so interesting about it is that so my oldest son, my oldest child, the older son, was in probably middle school around the time I wrote this. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's that age-old concern of Black parents. We want books that our children can see themselves in. And actually, that was the impetus. You know, it was really written. I think his name appears in the dedication page for Bruce. So that was what sort of propelled me to write it.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the feminist aspect of it, perhaps because at that time, you know, we use the word feminist. Alice Walker coined the term womanist back then, and that certainly resonated with me. And when I thought of people like my mother and my grandmother, you know, who lived, you know, feminist slash womanist lives, you know, lives that were challenging in some ways in terms of living in a colony and so on, but really were strong women, you know. And so I think that was what I was. I don't want to say channeling, but sort of resting myself on. I also practiced law here in Toronto for 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
The clientele that I had, they were predominantly black. You know, most of them had to have legal aid certificates, as it was called then. I don't know if they're still called that now. And so, you know, that that story about, you know, struggle and trying to set up new relationships, women and so on,
Mm-hmm.
I saw that in my practice as well, you know. So that was where it was coming from. It didn't start off, and certainly wasn't this, oh, I'm going to write this feminist primer. I was just writing a certain truth that I saw in my life always.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite remarkable. And the fact, like, I see Margaret's voice is like she just had this strength and just understanding that it was so far beyond her years in a way. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there were certainly, I think back of myself at that age, and I certainly made observations about, inequalities and
Mm-hmm.
but she was clear that this is not going to be my life. My life
Mm-hmm.
is going to be so vastly different than the lives of how she's seeing the lives of the women around her playing out, the adult
Yes.
women. So
Yes.
I was wondering who was your inspiration, or how did you come up with that character, Margaret?
I think you are a writer as well, and I think we kind, we pull on we pull on we pull on ourselves, we pull on people that we observe. I
Mhm.
think someone once said to me something about, were you a child like Margaret? And I said, no, if I were a child with Margaret, I wouldn't have lived to tell the tale. Because having been raised in the Caribbean, and at the time I was raised, it wasn't quite that children were to be seen and not heard, but it was,
Mhm.
it was pretty close to that. So you didn't talk back, you didn't, you weren't rude to your parents and things
Right.
like that.
Mhm.
And I was always a fairly quiet child. I read a lot. I think maybe I was writing into existence something about who I was at that age. I read vastly. It was really the
Mhm.
only thing I did. I would go to I was born in Tobago, then my dad moved us all. He was a principal of a primary school. We call them head
Mhm.
teachers under the
Mhm.
colonial system. So he
Mhm.
moved us all down to Trinidad
Mhm.
when I was about 8. And I
Mhm.
remember reading myself through the library in Port of Spain. And so but let me tell you, who I recall now as I make that bridge. Thank you for the question. Anne of Green Gables.
Mhm. Okay.
Think about the characters, yes?
Yes. Yes.
Anne of Green Gables. And even though she is white, red
Yes.
hair, but
Yes.
I think there was something about her feistiness.
Mhm.
Jamaicans would say feisty.
Tasty. Yeah.
You're being so feisty, and her
Yeah.
her constantly going up against the world. And Nadia, I'll share this with you. Her father, Anne's father, is called Cuthbert Cruikshank, right?
Mhm. Okay.
It's only years after that book was published I made the connection. Isn't one of Anne's and the uncle? Isn't he Cuthbert?
Cuthbert. That does sound familiar.
Yes, yes, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think she was the not the sort of
Muse.
the muse, the sort of
Yes.
progenitor of this
Yeah.
girl who was seeing the world really clearly,
Mhm.
and making conclusions which perhaps she couldn't, in my case, couldn't really say.
Mhm.
Yeah, that yeah, I definitely think they, and she grew up on an island just like I did,
Right.
Prince
Right.
Edward
That's true.
Island, all
Yes.
those things. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
really interesting that you
yeah,
mentioned Anna Green
yeah,
Gables.
yeah.
Um, yeah, because it was very clear, and I know as a Caribbean child, these are things that I might think, and if you were to say them, even the word
Exactly.
"feisty" in Jamaica, it's
Yeah.
not seen as a positive thing. It's
Yes.
seen as a
Exactly.
very,
Yeah.
out of line kind of
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah.
So I thought, she sounds like, is she Canadian? Does she represent the Canadian first generation
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
questioning
Yes.
the parents about why is this and why is that? And
Exactly.
they don't really
Exactly.
have patience.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, I think, what's her name, her sister's name, the older sister you said is pretty, and
Yes. And she wears
yes,
funny
and I'm just trying to find her name, but she's pretty, and
and wears lots of makeup and
wears lots of makeup and doesn't um hold on, I what a gosh, I'm looking for her name. I don't even know if she's named at this point.
Yes, I think she is, and do forgive me because it's been a long time since I have, since you would think that the book is probably older than you are.
No, it's not. But thank you. I'll take that as a compliment.
Oh yes, you could very easily be my granddaughter.
Oh, thank you. I thank you very much. I did not pay you to say that, but that's
No,
okay.
no, no.
No,
Well, I will claim you as my granddaughter.
yeah.
I'm always looking for
Aw,
grandchildren. I have one.
aw, yeah. So yeah, I know the older sister, so it's interesting. There's that older sister who seems to be easier to tolerate by the parents. The
What?
parents are pleased
Yeah,
with her, but
exactly.
she's Margaret's the one with the
Yes,
problematic characteristic of
yes,
asking questions,
yes.
which is actually a skill we're trying to encourage as a teacher, encourage our students to be inquisitive and all of that,
Yeah,
right?
yes. I mean, I
Yeah.
opened the page here on things I would most like to see changed in my life, which is very typical of young people at those ages.
Yes.
They really want to change things. And
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
am I in this family, for instance?
I,
Yeah.
and I love that about her because I'm like that would have been me writing in my journal. Like I could
Yes.
so I could really identify with Margaret's character. So one thing I know is that you start this book off. You basically do something really interesting. You drop us in the middle of this Underground Railroad game, and as an audience, I felt it was a little disorienting because I had to figure out who the characters were, what was happening, and it was very fast paced. All of a sudden, we're running, we're hiding, and all of this. So I was just wondering, what was what was your goal in starting off the book this way, dropping us into this game? Hmm.
Um, I think my goal was to capture the audience, capture the reader's attention right away. Like, and
Yeah.
even as you say, like the questions, what's going on? Who are these people? That those questions become the bridge to want to make the reader continue reading.
Right.
To sort of figure this out.
I was gonna just read like the first part. So
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, that'd be
our,
lovely.
our group, three slaves and me, Harriet as leader, were walking real fast, making good time. We weren't running. We didn't want to call attention to ourselves. Suddenly, I heard a noise. I stopped, held up my hand. Everyone stopped too. Yes, there it was, the sound of the slave catchers, slave owners, and their dogs, and they were coming fast. I looked around quickly. There was a hedge, a thick one, but not too tall. I motioned for the others to follow me. Quickly I wormed my way through the hedge and lay on the ground. The others followed, and not a minute too soon we were all lying on the damp earth, holding our breaths. Not 2 feet from us, the slave owners and dogs passed, making a whole heap of noise. Just as quickly they were gone. I stood up and dusted off my clothes. Hey, you! What are you doing? Get out of there! A man was shouting at us from his back door. He looked real mean and angry. So did his dog. Come on, guys, I yelled. Let's beat it. This time we went over the hedge. Right behind us was this great big German shepherd dog, slobbering and barking his head off. Boy, that was close, I said. Oh, he just barks a lot, someone added. He looked real mean, though. Okay, guys, I said. We're almost there. Let's run for it. We sprinted down the road to freedom. So just a lot happening there. Just all these actions and we don't know who's who yet. It really it's I mean even now it's like it's just captivating. You're already in and your heart's beating with the characters. It's quite an amazing start.
No,
Yeah.
thank you for that. And what I was going to say before you offered to read was that, and it's lovely where you ended. We sprinted down the road for freedom.
Mhm.
And as you read those words, I just thought, in terms of all that's happening,
Mhm.
now the trial around George Floyd and all
Mhm.
the long overdue. If only we could sprint down the road to freedom.
Mhm.
If
Yeah.
only we could just sprint down the road to freedom. And I was saying before you started reading, as when I pulled back in response to your question about starting there, I
Mhm.
mean, I think there's a sense in which I think the book wants to drop, even though they're young readers, to drop them into this history
Mhm.
that is all around them and us. That
Mhm.
even was the reason why the book was written, because there weren't and still aren't enough books telling our stories. So I mean, apart from the technique that, if you start, it's called in media res, in the middle of things, it sort of captures the audience much, right away. And then you can flash back, flash forward, or keep going. Yeah.
I love that. I definitely is something that I've thought about in my work, and just and I'm working on a few novels, so it's just just dropping, because you don't really like that backstory, that information right at the start. You don't quite need that,
Exactly.
and it's like you when you as you were writing, you presume we're, as an audience, intelligent enough to put it
Right.
all together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that I always say. I mean, I talk mainly to younger poets. Always respect your audience. Always trust that they're willing to do a little bit of work. Don't assume that you have to sort of spoon feed them everything, because for me as a reader, part of what is exciting is that you go on this journey of discovery with
Mhm.
the writer, because I
Yeah.
think fundamentally writing is essentially revelation. It's
Mhm.
revelation for the writer and it's revelation for the reader.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm learning that right now, and as I'm taking, so I've written children's books. I write mostly for young people, and I'm now learning about writing nonfiction and fiction. And I took a fiction course with Dion Brand, and that was one of her feedback for me, was that I was giving a lot away, that maybe don't need to tell everything, or teach.
Exactly.
She said I was teaching in my work, and I didn't know
Yes.
that. I wasn't aware. So I'm both a
Yes.
teacher and a writer for young
Yes.
people. So
Yeah.
it's about like restraining some of that,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
audience can figure it out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's great.
I
Great. Yeah. It's a great thing to learn.
Yeah,
And we
definitely.
always, I mean, don't for one minute think even older, more experienced writers are not
Mhm.
having that challenge still, because it's
Yeah,
always that push pull.
it's a push pull,
Yeah.
definitely. So one of the things I also talked about and mentioned is the CN Tower on the cover of the book, and and I I realized, like, the Toronto you described is a 1980s Toronto. There are no devices. The kids are playing outside, which is something you don't see very much now. But the kids are playing outside in the group. I remember that in the 80s, there was like a bunch of kids in the neighborhood, and we would en masse be playing all kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
And then the other part of this is that you describe St. Clair, and you mentioned certain landmarks, which I was familiar with. Like, you mentioned the McDonald's on
Yes.
in your,
And the
and I'm like,
library.
I knew that. And then you mentioned Winona School, and I've
Yeah.
actually presented there.
Yeah.
I'm a teacher in Toronto, and I've taught in a nearby neighborhood.
Right.
So I was picturing that neighborhood as I was reading it, and I was like, oh wow, the setting is a character in this story too. And
Absolutely.
I was
Yeah.
wondering, why was it important for you to set it in this neighborhood?
Um, so because right, I mean, I've lived here for almost half a century now,
Mm-hmm.
believe it or not. But this was the neighborhood that I moved to as a young mother, practicing lawyer. And, it was thought of back then as these are like starter homes, they call them, except our
Mm-hmm.
starting has continued. We're still here. But I think it's really important for us. When I grew up, the books I read were all about England or
Mm,
Europe
yeah,
and so
sure.
on.
Yeah.
And so, just bluntly put, I wanted, if you go back to what I said before. I'm writing this for my son and and all those children that he stands in for, that
Mm-hmm.
they have to see their neighborhood reflected back
Mm-hmm.
at them, back to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important. It's important for children, it's important for adults, and particularly for us who have a legacy of having lost our homes.
Mm-hmm.
I think this idea of rooting oneself, even if it may be for a period of time, is very important. And I also think that what that does in terms of writing, it gives vividness
Mm-hmm.
to to the work that you are doing. You know, it really strengthens the work so that you
Mm-hmm.
know exactly, you know, where you are. Yeah.
Yeah, and even the neighborhood, as I was just remembering, um, because this neighborhood also has a Caribbean history, and it's actually when my mother first came to Canada, she lived in this area, and there were a lot of um, I like a lot of Caribbean people, especially 60s and 70s, they would have come up through and lived in that area for a time, the Vaughan Road, Oakwood, and all of that, and just how it all connects. So I was just thinking about, at this point now, we've had the rising costs of living in
Hmm.
Toronto and gentrification in that neighborhood has occurred as well. And a lot of the people who are of the Caribbean background have left to go to other places. So I was just wondering, like, if what would you could this story like, what if Margaret was living in Jane and Finch? Like, because that's where a lot of people went to Jane and Finch, or to Brampton, or to Ajax, or to Scarborough, some of the
Hmm.
other communities where with higher Caribbean populations. So, how might her life look different? Could the story take place in those places? And yeah, and I guess my connecting question is just around the cost of living,
Hmm.
affordability in that
Hmm.
community for
Hmm.
especially for new Canadians.
Hmm. I think your question is profound one, multifaceted. I was going to say, and I'm glad, I'm glad you sort of segue to that. That I live in actually York, so just down the street, St. Clair, just a block north of St. Clair.
Hmm.
I live on this street.
Oh, okay. You don't want to give the address.
I'm not going to give the address, but there are three streets. You talked about Winona School.
Yes.
There's another street called Robina,
Okay.
another street called Alberta.
Okay.
Now, the story I heard some many years ago was that those streets were named after the daughters of a black man who owned
Oh,
land in this area.
okay. I did not know.
And I remember when I first heard it, I thought, yeah, that's interesting. Like I had an aunt called Rubina, it was a very
Yes, a
black
black
sounding
name.
name.
Yes,
Rubina, Alberta, and
and Winona.
Winona. Now, I got a publication done by the Toronto Public Library, which says, and in fact, it is true, there was a black man. His name is Mr. Coates. And there's a
Oh,
street called Coates Crescent or Coates Avenue, a little street, a little
wow.
curved
Okay.
street just east of where I live,
Yeah. Okay.
and named after him. Coates is his
Wow.
name, and he did have a daughter-in-law called Winona, and in fact, Winona
Oh,
was named after this daughter-in-law. I
wow.
don't know about the other two names, Alberta and Robina.
Wow.
What is also fascinating about what you're saying about your mom coming into this area and even my coming into this area is that what I was saying about where I'm located, I'm just north
Sure.
of the old city of Toronto.
Right.
This is the city of York.
Right.
York had the highest population of black people in the 1860s after I think one other borough here.
I
And
didn't
not just
know
that,
that.
it
Okay.
was also the location of many fugitive African
Right.
Americans.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
I
And
did
so
not know that.
I did not know that when I wrote the
I
story
I know about
either.
the Bathurst and Bloor area. I know about that, and
Yeah, yeah,
it's not too far away.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's not too far away, but that would have been in the old city of Toronto. We're talking
Sure.
now York, which is just a little
North.
bit north, and
Okay.
then there was a church that was torn down on a street north of me here called the street. The name is going to not Glenholm, Holland Park, and
Oh, I've heard
it
of Holland Park. Yeah.
yeah, it's a tiny street, and there was a church there, a black church.
Oh,
It was torn down
wow.
about a decade ago. They put in
Oh,
3 or 4 townhouses, and someone was telling me that
oh,
apparently that church had been involved in fugitive African American.
wow.
So, I mean, it's uncanny now to read that because I didn't know that when I was talking about the girls playing the game, Harriet, Margaret
Yeah.
playing the game. But to get back to your other issue, the neighborhood is changing. It's changing fast
Right.
because house prices are pricing. The area was also, there were a lot of Italian immigrants as well.
Right.
And so it was a really lovely mixed neighborhood.
And it comes out in the book too. You mentioned
Exactly,
some of the
exactly,
names. Yep.
exactly. But that's changing because the people who can afford to buy houses now that are $1 million, are not black folk by and large.
Mhm.
So the neighborhood is changing, unfortunately. In terms of your question, whether I think it could take place in Jane and Finch or in
Mhm.
Scarborough quite easily, because I think the core of the story is really the friendship. And the
Mhm.
core of the story is, how do we come into ourselves? How do we begin to name ourselves? I want a name that means something.
Mhm.
And
Because
I
yeah,
think that's a profound question for all of us. How do we make meaning in our lives? What do we mean?
yeah,
Yeah,
because
and
you did mention that. Like, I remember Margaret wanted to change her name to
yeah,
Harriet, and that
yeah,
was about choosing her name at that age.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then
I mean, yeah, yeah. So
sorry, you also mentioned the Jewish woman that
connection.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that Margaret's mom had worked for as well was
Mm-hmm.
named Harriet as well.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
Harriet Bluchamp. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And so that's really about her. I mean, her name does mean something, except she hasn't been really immersed in her name. She was given her grandmother's name, but she doesn't
Right.
know the grandmother in Barbados and so on. So she doesn't
Right.
realize that she does have a name that means something. But it's also this push that we get at that age. We want to, the world is out there. How are we
Yeah.
going to fit into the world? What
Right.
my family wants for me is not quite what I think I am,
Right.
and so
Yeah.
on. Yeah. So, and then the link with Mrs. Bluchamp, I think, goes back to when I was a child in the Caribbean reading. I remember reading books like Exodus about the Jewish people going to Palestine.
Right.
What I find interesting is that at that age, I wasn't reading anything about black folk and their exile, so to speak. So there's
Okay.
a sense in which it's not just a sense; it's a reality that when I first confront racial terror and terrorism, I
Mhm.
don't confront it about my own history.
Mhm.
I confront it about what happened to Jewish people, which is
Mhm.
interesting. I met a Jewish woman who once said to me that was the same for her, that she confronted Black history. She was from the US,
Okay.
as her first confrontation of racial terror, so to speak, So,
Mhm.
I mean, I think those are just really interesting ways. I mean, I think, of course, the problem the problem was that I remember going to school and being told that we didn't have a history, we as
Mhm.
black kids in a predominantly black society,
Yeah. And those are one of
So,
those.
yeah, so we didn't learn anything about ourselves.
Mhm.
And I had to come at these issues through another route,
Mhm.
which is valid and which is valuable as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's there's just so many layers there. Like all the multiple meanings. Like I found with the name Margaret. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
with Harriet, and how she was uncovering her birth story and how she
Mm-hmm.
came to be. Like those were all very rich details that just added to the story. One technique that I noticed you used, which I thought it reminded me of okay, I saw The Help,
Mm-hmm.
I saw part of it. I did not finish it. The movie is problematic, but
Mm-hmm.
but but something that you did, and I'm trying to recall where else I've seen it. But there's these almost like these confessionals where these, I think it happened three times. Once with Margaret's mom,
Oh yes,
another time with oh gosh, what was her name? Miss
Mrs.
B's. Is it Mrs.
Mrs.
B?
Mrs. Billings. Yes, yeah.
Mrs. Billings, and then another time with Zolma's mom. But it's almost like these grown women
Uh huh.
confessing, or kind of just going into their stories of how
Mm-hmm.
they had to fight back, run away,
Mm-hmm.
and they were all they had to run from patriarchal structures. They
Mm-hmm.
were running from oppression and
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of violence as well, and
Mm-hmm.
they're having these almost like they, and each time I believe they all said, oh, I shouldn't be burdening you with this.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost
Mm-hmm.
like they forget the child is listening, and
Absolutely.
Margaret's just soaking it up. And I was
Yeah.
wondering about that. Was that were you trying to um were you trying to get some a message across to the readers, as the young readers, or to the adult readers, or who was that message for? Because it was like yeah, Margaret's mom was talking about her trauma. It was really just sharing their trauma, and
Mm-hmm.
it almost gave understand explanation for why she did the things she did.
Mm-hmm.
Margaret's
Mm-hmm.
mom had, I believe, lost her parents at a young age, and then
Mm-hmm.
she was
Mm-hmm.
put in a
She
situation.
sort of farmed out. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so she
Mm-hmm.
was, yeah, farmed out, and that happened.
Mm-hmm.
That happened so often. So she was now, and then she realized, no, I need a different reality for myself, and she,
Mm-hmm.
and then Mrs. B. It was really interesting. I don't know. I just wanted to know what your goals in doing that were.
I think what I was trying, so several things come to mind there, Nadia. One that, and you said it, how Margaret is there soaking it up. There's a way in which often children are forgotten, at least my generation and in the Caribbean. And I think that that's not a bad thing, really.
Mhm.
I don't, yeah. I don't want to get into child raising practices, but
Oh
and
gosh.
so and so often I remember I would say to my kids quite often, like if I would be talking, as we say back home, big people talk, and then
Yes.
and then they're listening, and then they may say something, and I would say, listen, if you like don't ask any questions,
Yeah.
you're much better off just to sit there and just hear it. But if you call attention to yourself, then you're likely to be sent from the room, right?
Right. Right.
So that was part of it. I think as a child, children soak up a lot of information around them. But I
Yes.
think what's really important as well, Nadia, is our culture, the Caribbean culture, where you're not supposed to talk about these things. You carry
Hmm.
these burdens. Women, they carry these things in their hearts, in their bodies often, and it's
Hmm.
only when something happens that it sort of comes out almost like a
Like,
volcano spewing
right.
out.
Yeah.
And you're not supposed to seek help or to go and talk your family business.
Mhm.
That's taking the business outside and so
Yeah.
on. So
Yeah.
I think if anything, I mean, I don't, when I'm writing, I'm never aware of trying to sort of send messages or anything like that. But
Hmm.
I think what I was grappling with was just the terrible burden of our histories
Hmm.
and the histories that women carry so often
Hmm.
of physical abuse and sexual abuse and so on, and that in a way, Margaret becomes almost, she opens a way for them to sort of share this.
Yes.
And this is important. It's a generational, it's transferring generational knowledge.
Yes.
And then the adults are also aware that they don't want to burden her because, she's still
Right.
young. I recall my grandmother, just yesterday I was thinking about this. I recall my grandmother when she'd come and visit, my maternal grandmother, and she would be teaching me how to do the something called tatting, which was like making lace, something like crocheting.
Right.
She would be telling me these things about her husband and how her husband had another woman, but that she was the wife. And I remember she said this to me on one occasion. Oh, yeah, it's sort of really interesting stuff. A woman is like a white dress. It's spot
Mm,
a white dress spots easily, and a man
mm,
is like a pair of black trousers. It's really kind
mm.
of complicated information, but actually, she was giving me a truth there, because
Yeah.
things that men do and get away with, women more times than not can't do it. Yes.
Wow.
And then I remember she said to me once, if a man hits you once, he'll hit you again.
Yep.
Do you
She was,
know?
yeah, she was teaching you a lot of,
So yeah, she was
yeah.
passing that information on to me in a very kind of, she's teaching me how to do this thing and just kind of chatting and so on,
Yeah.
you know?
I'm looking at page 47, so I'm gonna just read a little bit. It says, uh, I don't know. Will you call me Harriet? Will you? Say yes, please, Mom. My mother was quiet, real quiet. This is on page 47. Her face pulled in and closed. You mad with me or something, Mom? No, just thinking. About what? My name. Your name? Tina? Tina's not my real name. Vashtina is my name, and I hate it. She sounded like she really hated it too. Vashtina? It's kind of ugly, Mum. Sounds like the name of a cow or something. But why'd you hate it? When I was your age, Margaret, that was all I used to hear. Vashtina do this. Vashtina do that. Vashtina come here. Vashtina go there. Sometimes I would prefer die than hear my name called again. I sat on the bed and watched my mother. It was like she had forgotten I was there. She went on. When my mother died, I was just 12. I had nowhere to go, no place to put my head, no bed, nothing. I used to sleep on some old bag, and most days it was one meal a day I was eating red beans and rice. Many a day, all I had for lunch was sugar water. I was living with my auntie then. She'd take me out of school and say that the only exam I was going past was breeding. She'd send me to work with a family, and 2 months after I get there, the man in the house start brushing against me and want to come feel me up. So I run away from there, back home to my auntie. She beat me for running away. She didn't even want to listen to my story. So I run away again and went to a different cousin. She used to make me get up at 5 in the morning to milk the cow and goat. Then I had to walk 5 miles to deliver milk, and every day a million times a day is Vashtina, Vashtina fetch, Vashtina carry, Vashtina clean, Vashtina scrub, and Vashtina wash all day long. So no, I never want to hear the name Vashtina again. Even Tina too close to it. But to change it completely, I have to go to a lawyer and go to court. Somehow I never seem ready to take that step. She was quiet after this. I was too. So yeah,
Ooh,
there's
wow.
a lot there, a lot
Ooh,
there. And I think about
hmm.
being a 14-year-old and just, oh my gosh, my mother is cracked open
Mm-hmm.
and just like, what do you
Mm-hmm.
do at that point, you know?
And isn't it lovely that she goes on and she says, and maybe I'll just read this out, this part here. She was quiet after this. I was too. I don't know if she had ever talked about her name before, but the way she talked made me think that she didn't talk about it much. Here I was thinking she had a cool name like Tina Turner, and it was really Vashtina. I wondered what Tina Turner's real name was. Probably something weird like Vashtina.
Anime. It was
Anna May,
anime.
yes.
Yeah.
I felt real sorry for my mom. I understood better why she always wanted to buy things for the house and for us. I wanted to cheer her up, and this is the part I'm coming to. Hey, Mom, I said, let's you and I change our names. I'll be Harriet, and you'll be what? I know, Hatshepsut. Like Queen Hatshepsut of Egypt. She was a pharaoh. You're big and black and beautiful, just like her, and we'll call you Sut for short. She smiled. I was glad to see her smiling. So it's Hatshepsut, right? Girl, you real crazy, and you know your father not going to want you to change your name.
Hmm. Wow.
So what
Yeah.
I think is lovely there is how the daughter is trying to change history in a way,
Hmm.
which is what the younger generation's job is. They
Yeah.
come next, the BLM generation, and they're trying to again take up that burden to change it again. Yeah.
Yeah. And changing names as they go along. It doesn't work anymore. It's not
So
working for us,
important.
so let's change
Exactly.
it. And
Yes.
that's the thing that I think sometimes it seems like the older generation may be scared to change that, even if it's not working for them, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so I have a question about this book being okay. So, what would you call it? Middle grade or young adult?
That's really gone straight to the
The publisher?
straight yes, straight to the issue because but the font has been changed somewhat, and I think that was done maybe to maybe make it look more appealing to
A
the
younger
the
or
younger
newer.
crowd. But as you
Yeah.
said at the beginning, there are a number of things there that younger people, although reading ahead of your time is not ahead of your age is not
Mhm.
a problem. You read
No,
things and then you
I
come
was
back to
reading
it.
The Color Purple in I think in the eighth grade or something.
Exactly, exactly. And the thing is, you get what you can from it.
Yeah.
I always thought of it more as a young adult,
Mhm.
although maybe that category has changed somewhat in the last 3 decades. You know,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
but I could see a good reader, a younger reader would also get. So I think it sort of straddles it, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think it straddles because I thought it was a middle grade and I read it as a middle grade student, but now I reading it as an adult, I said this is a young adult book because of
Yeah.
the themes, the
Yes.
maturity level, even
Yeah.
though they're 14, 13, 14, that is at the younger end of young
Absolutely.
adult
Yeah. Yes.
category. But
Yes.
these topics are actually they're not, and they're not very many books at that younger young adult,
Yes.
but
Yes.
you're right, it can be read at any age, and I could see it as part of like a reading list for like university course. There's some books that like I don't have it here, but if you've read Fried Plantain
Oh,
by
yes. Yeah.
Malika Reed Benta, right? So that it takes place during the adolescence, but it's I wouldn't call that a middle grade young adult. I would
Yes.
yeah. And then there's that book Funny Boy, Shyam Salvadorai. It takes place during adolescence, but it's not really like it's I wouldn't really quite put it in the young adult. But again, the category can be so broad.
It
So
can be. Yes.
yeah, so this
Yes.
is quite a literary book on its own, but it's also can be read by young and appreciated by young people.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so I actually have seen, so I remember, I know this book is being read as part of the curriculum in a lot of Caribbean countries in schools. So I had a
Yes.
friend
Yes.
who lives in Trinidad who said he read this book in school.
Yeah.
And I actually saw this book on sale in St. Lucia at a market.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, they said that they use it in this curriculum there as
See
well.
that this book was found this Canadian book here, and it's part of the curriculum being taught the Caribbean Women Writers series. Harriet's daughter, and it's a diasporic book, but I love how it's set in Toronto and has different kids immigrating in different diaspora parts of the Caribbean diaspora, but in the end, they still embrace and use the curriculum here. So I think it's awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
But even though this book is from 1988, that would be what, 20, 33 years? 33 years. There's still yet to be such a book. There's still yet to
Really?
be a middle grade book or young adult book set in Toronto with Caribbean teens. I can't think, maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's
Wow.
a book like that, but I can't think of
Wow. Wow.
one with that location. So I'm wondering what are like why do you think would you write more books for young people? Why hasn't there been a book like this since? Um, yeah, like what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Well, I think my first thought is a little, I'm a little sad that there hasn't been,
Hmm.
there haven't been more like that. And I think whatever we can do to encourage writers, because I think it's a really important age,
Hmm.
and do I want to write more? Yeah, in fact, ever since then I had an idea for a sequel to this.
Oh, that would be amazing.
And it would take place in Tobago. Like
Right?
when the
Where it end? Oh, sorry, I don't want to give it
yes,
away. Yeah, I don't
yes,
want to give
yes,
that away. But
yeah,
yes, that would be
yes,
amazing. Yes.
yeah. Um, but why do I think there haven't been? Maybe I don't know. I mean, I can give you sort of, cultural reasons. Maybe writers think that there's less of a market, but I know the young adult market is huge and
Hmm.
very lucrative, actually.
Yeah. That's so.
Hmm.
Relatively speaking.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. So there could be a market for it.
Oh, definitely,
Hmm.
definitely. And I think there needs to be more books like this.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
and I know this was adapted to a play as well.
Yeah, I wrote a stage script for it. We had one workshop performance, and again, it's something I'm about to sigh, but I won't sigh here. It's on the long list of so many
Yeah,
projects I
I
need
had to
to.
talk to you about that because I'm trying to adapt some of my books to the stage as
Yeah.
well.
Oh,
So
lovely, lovely.
yeah, one of the I guess connected to sorry if you finished this question or did you
Well,
want
yeah. The only question I would have is how can we encourage our young people, young girls, young boys to think of writing as a career, to think of it as something that they can do in schools. And I think it's I mean, if they're able to see. Are you still seeing me, by the way?
I can see you, yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
No, I was going to hold the book up. If they can be inspired by Harriet's daughter and so on,
Hmm.
I think that would be really lovely, and really important.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really something you touched on about encouraging our young people to become writers.
Mm-hmm.
I would love I would have loved that encouragement. Um, and I was certainly writing at that time.
Mm-hmm.
In my throughout high school, elementary school, I was making books, all kinds of things, but I never really knew I could make this as a career. I didn't
Exactly. Yeah.
um, I even did an internship at a magazine in New York, and I remember I was working for this non-for-profit, and we had to find our own internships. And everybody's like, "Oh, I'm going to intern here." Everything was local, and I said, "If I'm going to intern and get a full month of pay, I'm going to go far." And I remember the people saying, "No, you can't do that. That's not really allowed." And I said, "Watch me, just watch me." That's how I. If you tell me no, I'm going to do it, right?
Yeah.
So it was I found this was pre-internet, so I was I had to go there physically. I mailed my application, everything. There was a postal strike, so I did this wonderful internship. I enjoyed it, and then I came back and I had this feeling like I don't know where to go with this.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
certainly not something that my parents knew how to like. My mom wanted me to become a nurse.
Yes.
um I came back. I didn't have like a direction, like no guidance, nothing. So I essentially was like, okay, well, I don't know how to make money from this. I know if I finish my degree and get I became a teacher, an elementary school teacher. If I knew that predictable route, but the writer one was always kind of vague.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I was in I got cancer in my 30s.
Oh no.
Yeah. So when I got that, my biggest regret, two of them. One was I didn't travel enough, and I said I didn't make writing a
Central.
like a career
Mm-hmm.
central. I didn't publish any. So I made that kind of promise to myself. I have to
Mm-hmm.
do those two things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I thankfully have done that, but that was a kind of kick in the pants that I needed
Oh,
to pursue it. And outwardly, people say, you how do you do all of this stuff, but they don't, I guess they don't really know that that's essentially what's driving me,
yes,
is
lovely,
is to
lovely.
know that it could all end tomorrow and I
Yeah,
wouldn't have accomplished what I was here to
yeah,
do.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah,
but for me to get to that place, I'm in my 40s now.
yeah,
For me to get to that place, it certainly didn't come. It came essentially from inside first, but there was
mm-hmm.
no, and that's what I think about. Growing up in Rexdale and Jane and Finch, where were those mentors or that say, "Oh, you could do these workshops?" And I've talked to people in publishing, and it's still predominantly white,
White.
cis, hetero women who
Yes,
are in these, and they're going to these programs to get the qualifications. But what about the other kids that may be interested, like avid
yeah,
readers like myself,
yes,
writing and stuff, and we're never given that sort of a guidance.
absolutely. Yes,
So that's the kind of thing I totally agree with you, because I don't
yeah.
think we don't visibly see those jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and I don't think the schools are doing what they need to be doing
Hmm.
to be really giving our young people an
Hmm.
understanding that, it's all there. You can do it if you want
Yeah.
to take a stab at it.
And I
Yeah.
guess connected to this too, I've noticed in the last year there is a huge number of self-published authors who are
Mm.
publishing picture books, Black authors,
Oh, wow.
and I noticed that it's always been the case, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think we are naturally we and entrepreneurial. We'll do it any means necessary,
Yes. Yeah.
but we are doing these books, and because they're self-published, you have to pay, and you're
Mm-hmm.
paying out of pocket.
Mm-hmm.
It's not getting the same like review, like my books that are published with a publisher, they don't get the same distribution.
You're right.
So all those kind of things that
Yes.
get the books out there,
Yeah.
like even to get into a library in school,
Yeah.
all of those kind of things. So I feel like there's an education. I don't know if it's education piece or if people just don't want to have to wait, because it is a long process to
It is a
publish.
long
It's
process.
like
Yeah.
3 to 5 years to get your
Yeah.
book
Yeah. Yeah.
completed, right? And
Yeah.
if Black Lives Matter is going on and the George Floyd stuff is happening
Yeah.
and you want to say something now,
You want? Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
are your thoughts about that?
Oh, I think that, I mean, actually, it's interesting. I actually had something, faced a similar challenge recently because I started writing something last year
Hmm.
when the forests were burning and so on. And I thought,
Hmm.
there's a certain immediacy to it. And I
Right.
wanted to do that along with some other writings that, I had had. And I approached this press, and they were interested in doing it. But then by then, by the time I spoke to them, I think they were going to push it to try and get it out this year. But that's really pushing things,
Right.
because they got to put out their catalogs and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And then by then, Biden had won the election, things had begun to
Right.
change, so yeah,
Yes.
no, it actually it is minimum 2 years.
Yeah.
And
At least.
and
Yeah.
and things are changing so rapidly, though, that is a
Right.
challenge for us as humans, just on a
Yes.
day-to-day basis,
Hmm.
and also as writers. What do you do when you have something you want to get published? I self-published one work, and it was showboating. It's a book I have called Showboating, which had to do with the showboat
Right.
controversy.
Yes, I remember that. Hmm.
Yeah, and I did it for that very reason. I wanted to get the book out. Any proceeds, anything that had been sold would go towards. There was a committee that was demonstrating and so on.
Hmm.
But that was my way of getting around, if to and that was really a sort of activist act. It was, I'll publish this book, get it out, some of the essays in there I had published elsewhere, in any event and so on.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a role, but I think that's different. There's a role for activist publications.
Hmm.
And also, it's something that I never used. It doesn't happen with fiction or prose, but in poetry, we have the chapbook,
Right. Yeah.
and chapbooks come out, you can do the turnaround time in a few months, really.
Right.
But we don't have a similar thing in fiction or
Yeah.
in nonfiction.
Yeah.
But I think that there is a place for that kind of manifesto-like activist publishing. We're talking about something else, which is people who have a children's story or something like that. And I think I would advise that they take the time to sort of really get something underneath them to sort of, like, so the book can be because I always say the easiest part of the book is getting the product, like the actual book.
Yeah.
You can get someone to typeset it. You can hire an editor to do it. You have your product. The challenge is going to come. How do you distribute that? That's the
Right.
hardest part.
Yeah.
The reviews,
Exactly. And what
Yeah.
I find, so we had between Zeta Elliott, who I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but she's a Caribbean Canadian author who's been living in the US for 20 plus years. So, and she's was looking at all the children's books written about Black kids and Black experiences, and most of them were written by white authors.
Wow.
So this is from, I think she went up from 2000 to 2010, and then she stopped.
Wow.
And then we had a conversation because I think she was hoping there would have been some change as a result, and was kind of like done. And then we've had conversations. I've been writing articles about this. And recently in 2019, we were trying to count how many books have been published by Black Canadians, written by Black Canadians for kids in the last year. And there was no stats about that, but we came up with a number about 3. And this is out of 3 out of, I think, how many books were published that year? 400.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Gosh.
it's that the numbers are so low. And the tendency is that the books with the Black children on the cover, most of those are not written by Black authors. So that's where I kind of look at it, that because I'm often going to these things and I'm seeing not very many. I'm often the only person, Black person, and sometimes the only person of color in the spaces, and realizing that we, because that time to write and get the book published is so long, I'm trying to see who's coming up to get them there, because otherwise we are having to rely on our own resources to put these books out, these self-published books out, like in a couple months, and then it doesn't really shape the industry, the kind of the publishing landscape.
Absolutely.
In a way, like it stays grassroots. It does meet the needs of our people, but I'm also thinking of the other,
Right.
the larger community as a whole. And a lot of our tax dollars help to fund some of these publishers too.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Because
Right. So
they're getting grants.
Right.
Yeah.
And also we qualify for grants by getting books published. So there's all these economic pieces involved too.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's a very, very important issue, and I would definitely love to talk to you further about this.
Yeah.
To see
Sorry.
how we can. Yeah.
Yeah, I sort of digress from our.
No.
Okay.
It's not a digression at all, because it's so tied up with the existence of our work.
Oh, for sure. And I was going to also ask you, you were talking about the stage production, and I was starting to think about the language that you use in the book, because you use Zoma, her speech is written in dialect or in patois, and I guess you call it Tobagonian.
Tobago talk, they call it in the book.
Tobago talk. Yes, Tobago talk. So I love that. And I also write in, I call it Caribbean patois because
yes, patois,
yeah, my Malaika books don't name the island on purpose.
Yeah.
And I certainly have written it, and it's something that when I've had reviewers comment on it, it's interesting. I've had editors say, like, kind of like, I'm not sure if I will touch this. I've had people say, why did you write it in bad English, or why is the grammar off? And I said, no, this is written in a first person narrative.
Exactly.
We're seeing the world through her eyes.
Like, lovely.
So
Yeah.
so what I really identified with is how Zulma says she does not want to change her accent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
where I was like, wow, that I was wondering how did in 1988, when you came out with this book, how did the publishers respond to that? Were they willing to publish
Oh
it?
my God.
Was that
Oh,
a fight?
listen to me. I actually went into, I think that was the first time I sought the help of a therapist, because
Oh,
the book was turned down here in Canada. I'm not going to call names of any publishers. One well-known publisher said the story was fine, and the writing was very good, but they had concerns about the race of the characters. Yep. And that was when, and that was what sort of propelled me into talking to a therapist, because I thought, well, it's one thing if they're telling me that the writing is not good enough, I can go back and change that. But if you're telling me the characters' identity, their race is a problem, well, then it's almost like telling me that my race is a problem. Do you know? That was a serious existential blow. I sent it to England, and Heinemann published it. So the edition, the edition that you see, that's why it's in the Caribbean, because Heinemann, again, part of the colonial project, they had an African series, they had a Caribbean series, and Harriet's daughter. You see, and this is very important and goes back to what we were talking about just before. It's the politics of publication.
Right.
It's very important, and so they published it, and then the women's press here in Toronto bought the Canadian rights.
Oh.
And that was the first book, I think, by Black author that the women's press, now defunct, did.
Wow.
And that also was coming out of a huge controversy at the press about appropriation of voice and so on, because they had published an anthology in which white writers were writing about Latin America, and it just exploded. And the press actually split as a result of that. Because some people in the press were opposed to what they called appropriation, and others on the other side didn't see a problem with it.
And we still have that argument today.
And Harriet's daughter was published by the then, you'd say, the New Women's Press was I think one of their first publications.
Okay. So in terms of just using the language, the Tobago talk, was that an issue? Was that a concern?
Well, you know what? In terms of the publishers, I never even heard back from them about I think they maybe just got stuck at the race of the characters, as I was told. In England, that was never an issue.
Okay.
They never raised that with me. In fact, as I was reading the section I just read there, I thought, if I were rewriting this, I would sort of make it even more obviously. When I say more obviously, because there was just I'll turn to the page. These glasses are my reading glasses. Sorry, my computer glasses. At the top of 48 where I write, sometimes I would have preferred die than hear my name called again. And so that gets to an issue. I don't know whether you have this in your work, but one of the things that I have always felt is this: the way we speak, even if we're doing standard English, the way we speak is not exactly the way we write when we're writing as a novelist.
True. Yes.
It is filtered through something.
Yes.
to give the impression of somebody speaking. Yes?
Right. Yes.
And I think I still believe that that is the case with patois. That to just put it onto the page exactly as you speak it,
Yes.
I think, and people can criticize me, is not quite exactly the best way of doing it.
Right.
Like we have to filter it through something to sort of give that impression of the patois. And
Right.
but so that was just one idea I have. But the other thing is, I think if I were writing that today, I would write sometimes I woulda, WOUDA, I
Yes.
woulda prefer
Yes.
instead of I would have prefer. Although the would have prefer really conveys a
Right.
certain way Caribbean people speak. Yeah?
Yeah, no, it's something I've thought about because when I did Malaika's costume, I sent it out, and there were even parts of it that my editor suggested I um not anglicize, but it was something like um it wasn't she didn't even oh wait, I had alternate spellings throughout. That was it.
Yes.
I had alternate spellings throughout, and she said, "You know what? Let's not put the alternate spellings. Keep the words the same." So you still maintain the same rhythm and the same
Construction of
construction, but and people will get that. But
yes.
it's just and I struggled over that, and I decided to do it, and I'm glad because it's still there.
Yes.
But
Yes.
the next book that came out, Malaika's Winter Carnival, I guess there was one place where we didn't change it, and I forgot, so I was reading it, and um oh gosh, I can't remember what the grandmother says something, and I was shocked. I said, "Oh my gosh, we kept it," and because she was saying something to Malaika, and it was very Caribbean, and I said, "Okay,
Yes.
I'm glad it's in there
Yes.
because that's what it is."
Yeah.
And I just wanted to read a little bit from page 10 where it talks about the Tobago talk. I'm pretty sure it was on the way home that day. I had asked Zoma to spend the night at my place that I began to learn Tobago talk from Zoma. When I first met Zoma, I didn't understand much of what she said, especially when she talked quickly, which was often. Within 2 or 3 weeks, though, I was understanding most of what she was saying. Her talk had all these hills and valleys, nothing like my old, flat, old, boring Canadian talk. Where I would say I, she would say me, or ah. Where I said her, she would say she. But that was only the beginning of how we talked differently, although it was supposed to be English we both spoke. When I asked her on the way home that evening to teach me Tobago talk, that was what I called it, she got all quiet and serious. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, is what you want to talk like that for? You speak nice already. And Linda says, I like the way you talk. I want to talk like that. Sometimes I hear my mother on the phone with her Jamaican friends. When they get going, I can hardly understand them. Your mother talk dialect? Yep, but she likes to pretend she doesn't know how to. She thinks it's better to sound like a Canadian. And that's, again, something I can relate to. And in any case, after a while, you begin to lose your accent, like you're doing. I nudged her and smiled. Me? Never. Me never going to lose my accent. So I'm adding my Jamaicanness.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Me,
Yes.
me never. Me never going to lose my accent. I is a Tobagonian and I is proud of it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And
Yeah.
like I said, I'm bringing my Jamaicanness to it.
No.
And
Absolutely.
that was something even in my book. I had Saint Vincentian who read the books to kids, and she brings her Saint Vincentian
Yes.
accent.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's and one thing I noticed as a teacher, because I taught, so one of my inspirations for the Miss Lou book was I taught Miss Lou's poem, Education, Sliteration, to my grade 1 students. And they took the poem, like I gave them the poem to learn, like practice reading over the week. The next day, these 3 girls, all Jamaican background, memorized the whole poem. They're saying stutteration, education, right? Louise better cover. And I said, okay, listen, you have to go to the announcements, go put it so you could hear their little hi. This is so cute, me fill up my purse with money, them teeth away from me. And the kids,
I
they
love
just
it.
adopt it, and their bodies change. They love it.
Yes.
They engage with it.
Yeah.
And even I will read this book I was reading it to my grade 8 English class, and there's this little boy in there. He's he was 13, 14, but he was from Jamaica, like, and he still had the accent. He had everything. He's from the same part of Jamaica my family's from. And he just said, Miss, are you going to read that book again?
Oh.
That book, you know, the one with the patois in it. And I said,
Oh.
so they just love it. And they don't hear it. They don't hear it in books normally, right?
Yeah. And they don't
Textbooks.
see it on screen. Yeah.
They don't see it on screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. And, you know, and I think it's very important because language is where we live, you know.
Right.
I mean, I always believe, you know, so back in the Caribbean, you have, you know, this argument, you know, and even here, it's good, as you said, some people say it's bad English. And I grew up, you know, in a house where it was the Queen's English and good English and bad English.
Yes,
But I think children have to be taught how to write, you know, if they're in this context, you know, you're doing a job application. And this is why I have her say, I'll be bilingual too. When she asks Zulma to teach her, then I'll be bilingual too. Because what I'm saying there is that patois is another language.
It is. It is.
And it's doing the work that all languages do. But if you're doing a job application, you have to know how to write a sentence and so on. So teach them both as two languages.
Right. You know? And if we speak of it like that, then it brings it to a different status, because otherwise, you know, like you go to Europe, the kids speak 4 languages.
Yeah.
You go to most places, like in Africa, a lot of they speak the language of the tribal language.
Yeah.
Then they speak the colonial language, which is usually one of the official ones. And then often they speak English, and then they speak the common language that is between. So it's really a kind of a, like, we limit ourselves.
Absolutely.
We limit ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess my question then is, if you were to change, what would you change about this book, if anything?
Well, I think, you know, I think maybe, you know, looking more closely at just some, you know, some of the spoken patois bits. I don't think I would change anything, you know. I don't think so. I don't think so. No. What I would do is write the sequel.
Okay. All right.
Oh, please, God, help me. Forces, ancestors, help me.
You know what? I think that is such a great goal, and hearing you say that gives me encouragement, because I think one of my challenges is being this kind of imposter syndrome. So
we all have it.
Yeah, realizing like, oh, you have that too. Oh, okay, I guess I'm okay.
Yeah.
You know, but writing the sequel, I think, would be so important, and I think putting this in the hands of so many Caribbean girls would be so important to see themselves represented. And I think, I mean, maybe in my last question then would be like, what would you think is the challenge of being a Black Caribbean girl growing up in Toronto? Or what do you think is unique about being a Black Caribbean girl? Like, how would you describe that experience?
So one of the things I want to say, to go back to your previous question, if I would change anything, just as you asked this question, I had this memory, this thought. One of the critiques of the book was that it didn't portray Black men in a good light. And
yes.
What my response to that is, and as a writer, I'll share this with you, this book was first written from a third-person perspective. It was the omniscient narrator. And in that version, I was able to show that what was driving Mr. Crookshank was really a deep love for his daughter. You know, as parents, and then in particular immigrant parents, and in particular Black immigrant parents. I remember with my son, I thought as long as he was clean he wore clean clothes, and he was sent to school that way, everything would be okay, right? We want our kids to do, I came with this idea from the Caribbean.
Right.
The only thing was how high can you jump?
Mm-hmm.
Because we didn't, even though we know the Caribbean is affected by racism and colorism, we know that.
Yes, and classism.
And of course, classism.
Mm-hmm.
No, all the other isms, homophobia and so on.
Yes, yes.
But we live in predominantly black societies. The whole idea of a role model doesn't apply in terms of someone black. It might be a role model in terms of, oh, I want to dance. But we have black teachers, black doctors, black nurses. The society is black.
Yeah.
And my experience in school was one where the only thing demanded of me was, how high are you willing to jump? It wasn't that we don't think you can do it.
Okay.
So let me just finish with a point about the way black men are portrayed. In that version, I could talk about Mr. Cruikshank and all these desires and the things that all immigrant parents, all black parents have for their children. We want them to survive first off.
Yeah.
And then we want them to thrive, right?
Yeah.
When you switch that, and you mentioned this, to the first person account, you're seeing the world through Margaret Harriet's eyes.
Yeah.
And so I had to lose all those insights about Mr. Cruikshank. He's not a bad man. He supports his wife. He doesn't beat her, and just think how low the bar is, right? But, he's not an abusive man. He works hard. He wants the best for his children. Mm-hmm. He's not a bad man. But the way Margaret sees him, and we know this with children, you have these conflicts sometimes. She wants to do something and he's thinking, oh, you know what? That might happen to her and I don't want this to happen to her and this is how she's going to survive. So that is what I lost. And I think I am willing to pay the price for it because you get the inner life of this young black girl, and that's really important. But the intention was never to portray black men in a negative light. But that's one of the things you lose when you have you gain something, but you lose something with a first person account.
Yeah, yeah.
In terms of young black Caribbean girls, again, I come back to what I'm saying. I think that even though they may be growing up here, what their parents have I think it's a psychic understanding coming from the Caribbean, this wonderful place that punches above its weight. Intellectually, just think of the thinkers, that the world is still Frantz Fanon, Aimé Césaire, Sylvia Wynter,
Marcus Garvey,
Claudia Jones. I want to bring in the women there,
There's Audre Lorde and all of them.
Yes. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that, and again, we can start pushing this out. The people who got involved in the civil rights movement, so many of them had Caribbean parents. That is what the Caribbean...
Malcolm X.
Yeah. The Caribbean gives us that psychic understanding, or psychic equity, almost, of knowing what it is like to live in a black society, although that society is riven by issues of colorism and so on. But, we have that experience. And it's something that I say when I think about the United States, and I have a lot of compassion for my African American brothers and sisters who grew up in a country that practiced a kind of racial terrorism that is still going on today.
Yeah.
The racism in the Caribbean is of a different nature.
It's a different nature, yeah.
And I'm not for 1 minute reducing the homophobia and so on, and again, I know that there are changes happening there as well. In terms of gay movement and so on, I know the book was interpreted some years ago, I don't recall who it was, as maybe a lesbian story. That was never my intention. I don't think so. I think women have the capacity to have all people have these powerful friendships that don't necessarily have to be to sort of develop into a sexual
Yeah,
relationship.
it's just like you said about the Anna Green Gables. She had bosom buddies, and
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
so that
Yeah.
was her. Oh gosh, what was the girl's name?
I don't remember
they
it
they
either.
yeah. So
Yeah,
there's just
yeah,
like this friendship, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean, again, readers can
bring
bring
exactly.
whatever they want to bring to the book. But in terms of Black Caribbean girls, I think that that feistiness, we have to reclaim that word in a way.
Hmm.
I was talking to a friend colleague the other day and saying that, own way. I don't know if you have that expression in
Yes,
Jamaica.
own way, omanish. She took
Yeah,
omanish.
omanish, own way, and so on, right? And
Yeah,
and it's interesting that own way is never applied to men.
yeah,
I I can't think of a time when somebody would say, "Oh, he too own way." Do you know?
mhm,
Because it's kind of assumed that men will go their own way, but somehow,
yes.
and it's interesting as writers, we see how language is used to lock us in. Do you
Hmm.
know? And so, what I hope that the parents of those Caribbean girls growing up in Canada are getting is this sense of this, the migrant story is often, it's like Canada is paradise. You come here. Yes, people come here to make a better life, and
Right.
no apologies or explanations needed. But it's not that the place you've left necessarily is this terrible place and so on. It's a place of great beauty. It's a place where people have struggled to make lives
Hmm.
valuable. It's a place where people from there have contributed to the world. Reggae music, pan music,
Hmm.
all the different forms of dance hall, zouk, all those
Yeah.
things. So what I hope that they are able to sort of ground themselves on. And it's too bad, like my kids used to go to Black history classes after school and so on. I
Hmm.
don't think that happens anymore.
Yeah, they have them. Maybe I don't. I mean, I know they do that on Saturday morning, or
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
but it's not
yeah,
in every neighborhood. It's in certain.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So that is what I hope for, that we
Hmm.
that we can pass on to our children, to all our daughters,
Hmm.
whether biological or not, this this place that I think is so overlooked as just this place to go to for, vacation, sunsea, sex, whatever.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yes.
I just think it's one of the most heavenly places on the face of this earth. And you talked about having your cancer, and when you thought of what you regretted, and this morning I was thinking, I just want to see a sunset in Tobago again. Do you
Yeah.
know? Like the beauty,
Hmm.
and what do we make of that beauty as writers, as people? Do we take it for
Yes.
granted? How did
Yes.
it sustain us? What about these lands continue to sustain us?
Yes.
You know? We talk about
Yes.
little Jamaica up here in Eglinton.
Yes.
You know how, yeah, I think it's a tremendous legacy that we have to be proud of.
I agree with you. And I want to share two of my favorite passages. I know I just I like how I'm almost not ready for this to end, but I know it has to come to end. But
Mm.
these two passages I kind of jumped out at me. On page 143, I think it's Zulma says to Margaret, "You think Harriet Tubman let men push she around? I don't ever want to depend on a man ever, ever." I was like, wow, that's like, this is Margaret. They just take advantage of you. So this is, and I see now tying in, I see people might say, this is coming down hard on men.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yes. This
what
is
page is that?
page 143. Then it says, then I think it was Zoma who also says, you notice how we have to tell we mothers what is better for them? It's almost like we is the mother and they the children. And I was like, what? And then I don't know whether it was a shift in power. Maybe we understood each other better now than before. Maybe it was because we were both women. Like, so that to me was like, boom, like, the bomb drop, boom.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
and then there was another part. I think it was the last page. I almost started to cry, and maybe I won't give it away too much, but thank you, Margaret. The voice was rough, almost harsh. Thank you for bringing Zoma back. She belonged here. Come now, children. Your uncle Hubert waiting. Come on, let we go. And I
Yeah.
almost like, to me that was is so like
Mm-hmm.
it brought it full circle. It was um and don't we all wish we had that, like um some of us don't have that quite connection
Mm-hmm.
with the Caribbean. I know of people who we can't go back because, like, for my family, most of us have migrated, so there's
Yes,
really no
absolutely.
going back place. um I know of others who quite, there's something about this migration process that
Mm-hmm.
can be so harsh and so
Mm-hmm.
traumatic.
Yes.
Um, I think of people who I know. I mean, I won't name, but a person I know whose mother, I believe, was drug addicted and was a
Mm.
single mom, and then she passed on, and there's no connection anymore
Mm-hmm.
back to Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
I know another person, similar situation.
Mm-hmm.
They were raised by the mother, and then the mother passes, and then the it's just like you're in a state of survival, really, to get to come here to raise the children, to work,
Absolutely.
put food on the table, and then there's that sense of rootedness. Where do you really belong?
Yeah.
And to me, now that I have that piece of history you mentioned about Winona, Alberta,
Mm-hmm.
Robina, Coates, and then Augusta Avenue in Kensington Market was named after a Black doctor as well.
Mm-hmm. I
So,
didn't know
like,
that.
to have those rooted places to say, huh, we have been here. We
Mm-hmm.
are here.
Mm-hmm.
This, even one of the meeting places for the UNIA
Mm-hmm.
I used to go there, a place
The one.
called Timeless.
Yeah.
Um, and
Mm-hmm.
now it's just to have that rootedness to say,
Mm-hmm.
aha, we have a
Mm-hmm.
place here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It may no longer be the Caribbean. The Caribbean is still there, but we have a place here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I like that about this book. You have planted us in two places.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
thank you for that because I shouldn't leave the impression that I am, I know that, as Mrs. Billings says, sometimes you have to run.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to
It's
run,
true. It's
sometimes
true.
you have to leave, right? And
Yeah,
this is
it's
why I
true.
said that people leave for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
But I also think that we have to push what belonging. So even though push what belonging means, so that even
Right.
though the grandmother is saying she belong here, I think we can belong, as you say, in two places. We're here, but we also kind of know the roots. It doesn't mean that you have to be in that place to belong. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Because as we know, we can be here, we can be physically somewhere and not belong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think in the same way, you can be not somewhere and still belong to that place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And so I
Yeah.
think that yes, because there is a sense, Nadia, in which there is no going back. When I go back,
Yes. Yeah.
they know I'm not from there. I
Mm-hmm.
left Tobago when
Right
I was
away.
eight years old.
Yeah.
And even if I stay there, I have, so there's a sense in which we can never go back, but we do go back. And there's a sense in which we have to be here because our children are born here.
Mm-hmm.
So we've put down roots, and I mean children metaphorical as well,
Right.
the
Yeah.
work that we've done belongs here
Mm-hmm.
in this place. And exactly that publication by the Toronto Public Library I was telling you about, I remember when I opened it, there was a picture of a group of school kids from, early days, early days. And there's a little black face. And I remember I thought, oh my God, we were here before, So
Yeah.
it's amazing how that little image just
Yes.
kind of helped me to feel, well, no, I'm not just the first one in this, one of the first ones in this neighborhood. Very important.
Yeah.
And of course, we have to acknowledge that the indigenous people were here
Of course.
before as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
This
I
is their
just
land.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I just remembered one part from my book, Malaika's Winter Carnival, and it just um, when I and maybe I'm sensing like this connection with Zolma's experience. So this is
It's
the
beautiful.
first day of school for my
Uh-huh.
character Malaika.
Yeah.
She talks about
I love I
when
love
I
the hair.
and there's a story behind that hairstyle too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
goes, when I get there, the children speak a different way. The teachers speak a different way. No one understand me. I hate it.
Oh, yes, yes. Yes, 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 yes.
So, there's this book is essentially all about rootedness and rooted like in two places and how to
Yeah.
find your
Yes.
second
Yes.
the rooting. So
Yes.
that is a theme that I think is also universal
Absolutely.
regardless of where we're from.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you have any last words before we go
Um,
today?
Only that I'm just so honored that you wanted to talk to me, and I
Oh.
really, I think this has been this has been a lovely sharing. I really
Mm.
uh, am excited to meet a young writer like yourself, and to see, how we share similar issues and challenges, and
Yeah.
I'd love to keep this conversation going.
I agree.
Yeah.
My original vision for this conversation was to have like 4 or 5 of us. So maybe that
Yeah.
can happen one day
Oh,
because
yeah, that would be
I
lovely.
was
Yeah.
in this course. I had a reading list of. I was originally calling it "Finding My Jamaican Girlhood," and then I was looking at like portrayals of Black girlhood and trying to kind of create like almost like a sketch of what that Jamaican girlhood means. And I was pulling books like this one, and
Mm-hmm.
there are a couple of others like from not necessarily Jamaica itself, but other Caribbean diasporic experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking, I had this vision of, okay, all of us are going to sit down. And so I was saying, you know what, that would be great. One day we could maybe
Let's,
do
yeah,
that.
let's, yeah,
Yeah.
no, I'm very interested to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
love talking to other writers and other Black
right.
writers. Yeah.
Yeah. And the next person I will interview is actually, her name is Janice Lynn Mather. She's Jamaican Bahamian, but she
Mm.
lives in BC. And
Mm-hmm.
she wrote a book, 2 books. One is called Learning to Breathe, and the second one is called Facing the Sun. And just a gorgeous writer. She's also a poet, but
Mm-hmm.
also that comes out in her writing is very
Yeah.
rich. And
And
yeah,
this is MGYA?
she writes YA,
Mm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
and
I
it's
think I heard, yeah.
yeah, and so the first book was nominated for a GG,
Yeah.
and she writes. It's a very sophisticated, like you can. This is like this book is thick. It's like 400 pages, but it's can be read by adults, and it requires the reader to do a little bit of work.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it's so well written.
Mm-hmm.
So I was saying, okay, if we could all get into one room
Yes, let's
and
do
have a
that.
talk, yes, that
Yes.
would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you so very
Thank you so much, Nadia. I really,
for spending this part of your morning with us, and I've learned so much, and actually I'm going to be writing a critical paper, so and I hope that you'll continue working on those projects.
yes. And I mean, if you can, when your paper is done, send it to me. I'd love to read.
Oh, sure,
I'd love
yeah,
to read your research, just to see
yeah.
what's happening. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. All
Let's
right.
keep in touch.
Yes, for sure.
I will. Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.